Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UW AI Task Force Town Hall on the intersection of teaching and AI. To begin, I'd like to share my screen and acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Because land acknowledgements are but a first step, I also invite you to visit the Indigenous Students page on the Teaching at UW website, which shares information on how instructors can create classrooms that are welcoming and supportive of Indigenous students. My name is Penelope Moon, and I have the privilege of directing UW Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'm a proud co-leader of the Teaching at UW Network, which is a wonderful group of folks who work to support reflective, inclusive, evidence-based teaching across our 3 campuses. At the end of the session, I'll share another link to the Teaching at UW website, where you can find all sorts of terrific resources and learning opportunities for instructors of any rank in any field and on any campus, including some stuff about teaching and AI. I've been teaching in higher ed for over 30 years, and throughout that time, I've experienced and walked alongside colleagues during times of significant change and disruption. This moment, when we are wrestling with the emergence of AI in the teaching space, feels at the same time exciting, unsettling, and really, really familiar. Many of you are excited about AI, and just as many of you feel a sense of trepidation or outright dread. Regardless of how you feel about AI, this town hall is for you. Our time together today is about creating opportunities to hear perspectives on the intersection of AI and teaching, and to ask questions about the intersection of AI and teaching. And to do this, I've invited a group of faculty colleagues to share their perspectives and experiences with using AI in their teaching. I've asked them to consider a few questions, which we'll explore for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions from you. Before we get to our panel, though, I want to say a few things about this moment in time. And these are my thoughts. They don't necessarily represent the views of the panelists, but I think they might be useful in helping some of you who may be feeling a little anxious establish a toehold in the process of thinking about teaching in an AI world. I know that some of you out there want to focus the conversation on preventing and rooting out unauthorized student use of AI, and this is totally understandable. Currently, though, there is no reliable way to detect unauthorized use of AI. And some of the tools that promise to do so actually incorrectly flag the work of neurodiverse learners or that of students whose first language is not English. We'll talk a bit about academic integrity today, but approaches to AI that center shutting down student use aren't likely to be successful. Moreover, such approaches don't really prepare our students to live and work in an AI world. So I want to suggest that even if you despise AI, it's important to explore its intersection with your teaching. Like all technologies, we should interrogate AI and determine if its integration into our teaching is socially useful. We should neither assume AI has no value in the classroom, nor should we assume that it's valuable or useful in all teaching contexts. Another thing I want to say before we get to our panel is that I firmly believe that human instructors will continue to be the difference makers in student learning. Technology thinker Cory Doctorow stresses that a lot of the hype about AI robots pushing humans out of the loop is just that, hype and boosterism by people focused on profit margins. But I also believe that instructors will continue to be important in higher ed because we've kind of been here before. I said in the opening that this moment felt a little familiar. And when I say that, I'm thinking about when online learning broke into mainstream higher ed in the 2010s. At that moment, many faculty members worried that they would become obsolete and that their students wouldn't or couldn't learn online. Yet research has consistently shown that students can and do learn in online formats, and that the most important variables in online learner success are good pedagogy and design and an instructor who cares. The same will be true for education in an AI world. Your presence and connection with students will be crucial to their learning, and the creative ways that you integrate AI into the classroom will make all the difference in the world for them. So at a time when it feels like AI has upended the apple cart, it might be helpful to remember that you likely already possess the toolkit you need to teach well in an AI world. And that toolkit is good pedagogy and care for students. Okay, let's get to our panel. I'm going to introduce our panelists in reverse chronological order. Let me get to my notes here. Ian Schnee is, my notes, hold on 2 seconds. Here we go. Ian Schnee is teaching professor and director of undergraduate studies in philosophy in the College of Arts and Sciences on the Seattle campus. Katy Pearce is associate professor in communication in the College of Arts and Sciences, also on the Seattle campus. Mei Lin is lecturer in first year and pre-major programs in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences from the Bothell campus. And Brock Kraft is teaching professor in human-centered design and engineering in the College of Engineering, also on the Seattle campus. So like I said, the panel is going to discuss a few topics for about 30 minutes, and then we'll address questions from the audience. You can submit questions by email or in the Q&A section. So to submit them by email, you can email townhall@uw.edu, and you can submit them in the Q&A section of this Zoom space. So on the bottom of your Zoom window, you might see a Q&A icon. You can click on that and submit your question. If you don't see that icon, click on the More icon, and that should open up a menu where you can go to the Q&A. You can select the Q&A space. Using the Q&A space in Zoom rather than the chat allows you to upvote questions you find particularly relevant to you, and that helps us prioritize how we address them. Okay, without further ado, let's get to our prepared questions, our prepared topics that the panel and I talked about. So question number 1. When generative AI broke open in higher ed in late 2022, concerns about academic integrity dominated the conversation. As instructors, how do you think about academic integrity in our new AI world? And I'm going to pitch it to Mei to lead us off.
Thank you, Pan. Before I respond to the question directly, I like to emphasize that as an instructor teaching mainly first-year students in 100-level writing and discovery core experience courses at UW Bothell, I'm both excited and concerned about AI. And I believe that how we as instructors think about AI is largely dictated by our disciplines and the courses we teach. As the learning outcomes vary in our respective classes, the academic standards are also different. Since 2022, I've felt I was forced in a very good way to think about my own pedagogy. How and why do I teach this skill in such a way with scaffolded assignments activities? And what constitutes academic misconduct in each assignment? In the past, I took it for granted that we know what was cheating and why it was considered cheating, and I didn't talk too much about it with my students. And since AI broke open, I have thought more deeply about academic integrity and misconduct and started actively engaging my students in the conversation. I've created AI use policy as it related to my class and included in the syllabus I went over with my students on the first day of the quarter. Before presenting the policy, I had a seminar style discussion with my students by asking them questions such as, what is the meaning of human existence and what distinguishes us from machines? What is your goal as a college student and what do you expect to gain out of college education? What is the purpose of AI? How does AI function in your life? The students were very engaged in the conversation and came up with responses we as educators would feel very happy about, such as college is where I learn how to critically think and solve complex problems. Humans are emotional, authentic, and creative, and AI helps us to do the tedious things and make learning easy. And based on their share out, we move on to talk about, so to navigate complex concepts, one needs to first learn the basic skills in order to become an effective critical thinker. And when I say that AI is not allowed in certain assignments, that's because the actual process needed to complete the assignment is a learning outcome itself. And if AI is used to bypass such a learning process, it's considered academic misconduct. And I emphasize that it's not that I don't want them to use AI. I want them to use it very well in the future. And to achieve that, it's crucial for them to go through the learning process on their own, to cultivate their own critical thinking ability and their own perspectives about the world and everything in it. My students seem to understand where I came from, I believe so, and know that what they may be missing out or giving up when they use AI to bypass the learning just so that they can have a quick, seemingly nice product. So based on our conversation, students wanted their learning process and then product to be authentic and personal. They don't want to be AI's middle persons. So in short, this is how I approach academic misconduct now. I still think about it. I talk about it because we have to not so much focusing on policing students from cheating, because those who are resourceful and determined will find a way, but more on why learning should be personal, challenging but rewarding, and how they need to be the authentic owners of the knowledge they produce and transfer. And when they are motivated to be authentic and show up during the learning process, academic misconduct naturally becomes lesser of my concern as an instructor, as I devote most of my attention to motivating my students to undergo their respective learning processes to perform successfully in class. And that's where I am at in terms of AI and academic integrity. And I like to hear what my fellow panelists think about this.
I have a few things I could add to what May said. I think this is a really tough time because, on the one hand, students are confused and they want guidance from us. And so I think we do owe them some guidance, for example, just by syllabus policies. On the other hand, I think a lot of faculty have no idea what their syllabus policy ought to be or how to encourage uh, students to use the tools responsibly and not engage in the kind of academic misconduct practices May was talking about. So here's just a couple of simple suggestions. One is the norm of transparency. So tell your students that if you want to allow AI at all, tell them that they have to explain it, acknowledge it. That makes them be reflective about their own learning process, so it encourages some metacognitive goals. And if they're not willing to tell you, then that's a red flag in my mind that we're crossing some boundaries of academic honesty. And if you're asking that of your students, transparency, I think as faculty members, we should model that behavior too and tell students how you use AI. What have you dabbled with? What have you learned from it about your own workflows? A second norm I think is important is responsibility. So, and I think this is worthwhile putting on the syllabus. Students are responsible for every word they submit. So if a student actually is using words that Grammarly has put into their paper and they don't know, they can't say, "Oh, well, I didn't put it there. Grammarly made those changes and I wasn't aware of it." Or the AI made up those citations. I'm sorry. Well, the student still is submitting the work and they need to take responsibility for everything that they submit. And then the last thing I would say, similar to what May was saying, is if you have a discussion class where you engage in discussion norm building activities with students at the start of the quarter, for example, you get the students to collectively decide on the norms to which they'll hold each other accountable, then roll AI discussions into that as well and have them help construct that policy. So you can co-opt students into this process if you're a faculty member wondering even what your policies ought to be.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in. And I've seen we've already had a number of questions on this topic, which is not surprising. I echo everything that May and Ian have said. And I will say this is a difficult topic. People are emotional about this. It is hard, it is challenging. And I want to say that it is when we think about what we want to allow or not allow in the classroom, we also need to think about what can and cannot actually be enforced. And the fact is now, as we already heard about Ian's example of students being accountable for what Grammarly wrote for them, now so much is baked in Microsoft Word, in Google Docs, in Gmail, etc., that it's already difficult and will become increasingly difficult to really say like what is and what is not AI. A photograph that you take on your smartphone is not actually a still capture of a moment. It is a combination of the moments, and it took the best smile and eyes and these sort of things. So what is a photograph even now? So I would say that to me, introducing barriers means that, as May already had mentioned that you're going to be doing a lot of policing, which is time consuming and is probably not the environment you want between you and your students. In my opinion, it is more of a question of changing assignments to avoid easy use of generative AI, if that's what's important to you. Right now, I do a lot of in-class handwritten work. I will sometimes scan the handwritten work and then allow students to type it up later, but I have the original scans. And creating rubrics that discourage the type of answers that AI tends to create. Because again, as Penn said at the beginning, there is no way to accurately detect if it's AI or not. So you really have no tools at your disposal for this. So basically, disallowing entirely is going to be futile, and having more specific policies about what is and what is not allowed. And as Ian said, what kind of disclosures and transparency you're expecting is at least where I am at right now, trying to live in the reality that we're in. But I absolutely acknowledge that it is not fun, it is not pleasant, and it is not easy.
Thanks. I do want to address one question really quickly. When we talk about AI in this town hall, we're chiefly referring to generative AI, and we're not going to do a deep dive into how we think it works or the mechanics of it. We're talking about generative AI. We can leave that discussion for another panel. Are we ready to move on to question 2? Okay, question 2. So when you're thinking about integrating AI into your teaching, there's kind of 2 major pathways that you can do that. One is you can integrate it in student-facing ways, integrating it into assignments and activities. And the other is to use AI behind the scenes in your course development, of course, your course design, course development, materials development. This question asks how you have integrated AI into your teaching and what challenges have you encountered. And let's start with a discussion about the student-facing integration of AI into your teaching. And we'll start with Ian here.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Here's an example from a class that I just finished teaching in fall quarter. This is a 400 level class on the philosophy of video games, and it's mainly undergraduate majors as well as a few graduate students. And one of the topics we discuss in that class is the ethics of game development. So what do studios owe their communities in terms of monitoring toxic behavior, or what are the ethics of different kinds of monetization strategies? And for this 2-hour class period, what I did is I divided it into 2 parts. So in the first 30 or 40 minutes, we had a active learning style lecture, the sort of thing I did in previous years entirely. And I just condensed that material into about 40 minutes, posing questions to students. They engaged in small groups and worked through the reading and the YouTube video they had to watch as preparation. And then in the second half of the class, we had about an hour and 10 or 20 minutes. We did a group activity that required or that allowed students to use AI. So what they had to do was break into small groups that I randomly assigned them to of 5 or 6 students. And they had to role play as a consulting firm hired by one of these studios and investigate the case studies. So they had to create an ethical policy analysis, which is a genre of writing which they don't have a lot of preparation for. So they needed a lot of support from the technologies to figure out how to even accomplish that. They had to choose one of the studios and one of the ethical problems and develop the analysis that proposed solutions. So this was an incredibly difficult assignment that required a lot of teamwork. It required them to divide roles and to actually construct this thing in a short time frame, in an hour and 10 minutes. So the AI was a ton of help, but they also learned the ways in which the AI could make their work better and the ways in which it didn't improve their work. So it accomplished learning goals about getting them to engage with the course content, but also understanding and learning about AI as a tool at the same time. I'll just pass it over to see if other panelists maybe have some examples too.
Sure. So again, so for this, we're talking about specifically student-facing things. For me, something I always do now is check for the clarity of my instructions of an assignment with AI. Why wouldn't I? I want my assignments to be clear. I want my instructions to be clear. And if something wasn't, and I've been teaching for 15 years, but it's still, I want it to be clear. And it will often make really great little tips about things. Checking tone in an email. We all need that kind of support every now and then when we're especially upset about something. And a couple of things that I do beyond that is that when I assign a new reading, especially if it's a little dense, I'll run it through AI and say, do you anticipate anything that you think my students might have difficulty with, or colloquialisms that might not be clear to them, or references that make me feel very old that I think they should, like they don't know what AOL is and I fell on the floor. So AI being able to do that, again, telling it, I'm talking about university students in this course, etc., really helps. And I can annotate and it helps students better understand the material, which I don't think anyone can argue with. And then an example just in the classroom, I have students create a poster on course concepts. They create a poster and I say, make it for middle school or high school students. Great activity. They have to explain things in clearer ways. I'll say to them, check your poster language with AI to see if it's appropriate for 8th graders. Why wouldn't they? I'm not asking them to generate text with AI. I'm asking them to check what they wrote on their poster to see if it makes sense to a 7th grader. The results are infinitely better, sort of like Ian's example of this genre that students aren't familiar writing in. Using it in this way makes total sense for me and for them. And I think I'm going to pass it over to May now.
Thank you, Katy and Ian. I'm going to chime in real quick for 2 types of classes that I teach. For my 100 level writing classes, in addition to incorporating AI to help students learn how to generate key terms for research, which many of my colleagues in composition have also been doing, I mainly focus on facilitating information literacy, which includes AI literacy. I talk with my students in a reflective circle about how they use AI professionally and personally, and explain why to become a critical thinker, reader, and writer, one needs to go through the actual process of thinking, reading, and writing independently. And AI use is not allowed in many of the assignments on core writing skills in my writing classes. My core principle for determining if I integrate AI in my course design is if the implementation of AI will enhance students' learning of a skill or knowledge. I always strive for high impact learning practices in my classroom whenever I can, because I think that's what enables learning outcomes, which are oftentimes product driven, to become process focused. And with high impact learning practices in mind, I don't consider AI very instrumental for my 100 level writing classes. On the other hand, I'm excited about a Discovery Core Experience course I'm proposing to teach in fall on AI and world building, where AI literacy as well as the use of AI tools will be the center of the course. And in this course, students will undertake a quarter-long world building process to create a real-world fantasy group project set in the era of AI using a variety of AI tools. And I'm excited about this course, as in this course, AI is what drives high impact practices during students' learning process. And the use of AI is in the service of learning and not to bypass learning.
Thank you for those examples of using AI in a student-facing way. And I love how all of you touched on it in some way. Start with what you want students to achieve and be able to do, and then think about AI integration after you have that clear in your head. So we all also mentioned that there's kind of behind the scenes use of AI to support your teaching. And I wonder, Brock, can you talk a little bit about how you use AI behind the scenes in your teaching?
Yeah, thank you very much, Penelope. The thing that I think I find the most valuable is in checking some assumptions that I've made, and also just reminding me or clarifying when I've made good choices, or maybe when I can make better choices. So, for example, I often am reviewing learning objectives of a course that I may be teaching, or maybe if I'm designing a new course, I'll have some draft learning objectives for that course. And I know that it's good practice to make learning objectives that follow a particular pattern, and also to make sure that they're aligned with the aspects of Bloom's taxonomy, for example, that I want students to to be challenged with, and to make sure that they are thinking in ways that progressively get more interesting and more challenging for them. So I will often take a set of learning objectives and pass it to an AI tool to say, hey, what do you think of these learning objectives that I've designed for this class? And usually I'll put a course description for the class in, and then see what the feedback is, and see where I might be able to tweak those learning objectives so that they can more well align with what I know to be good practice already. And in addition, it's useful to train the model in advance. So I've already explained to the tool that I most frequently use, who I am, provided the context, what I'm teaching, what my subject area is, what exact background I have, what kind of responses I expect. I've given it examples of good practices for writing learning objectives, and also examples of Bloom's taxonomy, so that I know that when I get back, it's going to be, roughly adhering to the standards that I expect. And remarkably, I usually get back something that's pretty aligned with what I would, what I expect to see. And I also get critical feedback where I may have forgotten to put something into the learning objectives that I wanted. And so about 80% of the time I get something that's pretty useful back, maybe a suggestion here or there. About 20% is less useful and I just chuck it out. But then I have the experience to know what's the junk and what's not the junk, and I keep the good stuff.
I just want to jump in here because the way you prompt AI matters here, and Ethan Mollick talks a lot about this in his book Co-Intelligence: Living and Working with AI. And we've been working with a group of faculty around integrating AI into their teaching, and this really does make a difference. Like telling it who you are, or asking it to pretend that it's someone who's similar to you. Yeah, that yields way better results. So thanks for bringing that up, Brock. Katy, I think you might have some stuff to say here, behind the scenes use.
I mean, for me, a lot of it is about saving time on tedious things that in the past took up a lot of my time. For example, it's finals week. A lot of us are probably doing finals related things. Using AI to create different versions of the exam saves me hours. Using AI to create questions for my practice quiz bank for my exam saves me incredible amounts of time. So little things like that, checking rubric consistency, also even a little deeper. I'll take a draft of my lecture and then I will cross-reference it in AI with the readings, and I'll say, were there spots in my lecture that I could have better connected, that I haven't given yet, that I can better connect with the assigned readings? Great, often really good. And AI, we often can talk about it like it's a collaborator, and it's a collaborator that is infinitely patient. Not all are winners, but generative AI can come up with some really great ideas for in-class activities, essay prompts. It's a great sounding board. And then if you find a winner, you can work through it to create a rubric, instructions, etc. And someone asked in the Q&A perfectly, what about disclosing this? So without a doubt, there is currently stigma around this. A little bit of me is nervous telling you all, my colleagues, that I'm doing these things, because some people might be like, that's not what we're supposed to do, that's wrong. For me, I always think, am I creating a better learning environment for my students by having clearer instructions, cooler activities that are more fun? Like they are winners, they are real winners. This is not altogether that different from popping down the hallway and asking a colleague, like, what do you do for this? These sort of things, but with a lot more material at hand, I guess. Acknowledging the ethical considerations about intellectual property, that this isn't coming from nowhere, this is drawing on other people's work. Currently, I don't disclose this all the time to undergraduates because of the stigma associated with it. I'm certainly acknowledging it to you all. With graduate students, I probably would talk about it more. I think as time goes on, I will probably be more explicit. I am absolutely, though, when I use AI to create a graphic for something, I tell them, or occasionally I'll use like voice recognition to give feedback, and I'll use an AI tool to like tidy it up. And I always tell them, if it doesn't sound like me, it's because I use this tool because I was, doing it with voice recognition. But thinking about it as a way to save you a little time on tedious things, I think, especially for those of you that haven't kind of tried things out with teaching in AI, is a really nice first step. And it's extremely rewarding very quickly when you are finished with those 4 versions of the exam in 20 minutes.
Anyone else want to chime in on this question?
I can chime real quick. Yeah, if that's okay. Yeah. So for me, by exploring different AI tools, I feel inspired and excited about the kind of fun, innovative, and creative assignments and activity prompts I can come up with for certain multimodal writing assignments. So for example, when I designed a multimodal writing project on narrative cartography before the age of AI, I was not satisfied with the free tools I could find online and provide for my students to draw their creative, fantastic maps to illustrate their personal narratives. And the students who disliked or weren't comfortable about drawing in general might have been more stressed about the project. And since I began exploring and learning to use AI tools to generate fantastic maps, I'm excited about the varieties and quality of the maps students can generate using the tools to help streamline their process of translating their narrative to a map, as well as alleviating some of the stress they may experience when it comes to drawing or art in general. In short, exploring different AI tools as I revise my assignment prompts for different classes where AI implementation can enhance student learning has been rather fun, exciting, and rewarding for me.
Thank you all. Yeah, I don't use AI a lot to develop teaching materials, but it's really good at developing rubrics and crafting learning outcomes. It's really good at offering up some drafts of those that you can iterate on. So yeah, I think there are a lot of applications behind the scenes. So thanks for sharing. Okay, are we ready to move on to our next question? All right. What outcomes have you perceived as a result of integrating AI into your teaching? So for example, have you noticed a difference in students' experiences and their academic performance? We'll let Brock lead us off on this one.
Thanks, Ben. I'm always trying to think of what new, thoughtful, and human-centered ways can I help students and support them in intelligently engaging with these tools. I want to embrace my students' enthusiasm and their curiosity, and they are really eager to know how to skillfully engage with these tools. And want to be smart about it. Like they really want to be clever, intelligent, and thinking, and they're already usually deeply skeptical about what they can get back from tools like this. So I want to encourage that skepticism, encourage that thinking, and recognize at the same time, like this is the world we're in now. So we have to learn how to engage intelligently. So one example that I have is of an assignment. Many of my classes end with a final project of some kind for 3 or 4 weeks. And so one of the assignments in one of my classes is about drafting a project proposal for what the students are going to do for the next few weeks. And producing those drafts, I have very carefully in my Canvas, I have like lots of very explicit instructions about what the draft should look like, what it should contain, what its structure should be, what I'm looking for. I have a good rubric so that they'll know how to achieve a good score on the proposal. But I also wanted to help them at the same time think a little bit differently about their draft proposals. And get some experience engaging with AI tools. So I have created an activity where students can improve or get feedback on their own submissions before they submit. So in class, I have students pair off for this activity, and they submit to an AI tool the Canvas description for what they should be submitting. Right, so what's the assignment instructions that I'm expecting to see? And then after that, the AI tool digests that, and I model this in the class. I show them doing this so that they'll know what to do. And then I have them submit the draft of the proposal that they're planning to submit to me for the assignment without their name on it or any identifying information. and then get feedback from the tool about how their submission, their planned submission, meets those objectives that I created for them. And so in their pairs, they look at the results of this submission and they can critically say, well, oh gosh, I didn't think about that. Or, the what I got back wasn't really actually an improvement on, even though it looks like it might be an improvement. And through discussions with each other, they can develop a bit of a critical frame on what they're getting back from the model. And so that's really helpful for them to improve what they will plan to submit. And I've found that many times students have maybe forgotten or omitted something that they were, they intended to put in there, but they didn't actually cover it. And that is either highlighted by, the AI or by feedback from their peers. One thing I neglected to mention is that they get peer feedback first from each other. Then they use the AI tool to reiterate on that feedback. And that way they're engaging with that feedback process with each other without any support, and then can actually have a critical perspective on what they get back from the tool. And I have found that doing this, I get much more robust project plans from the get-go. People do well, and it's very exciting, and I'm very pleased to support the students in this way.
Anyone else want to chime in on this question of what they perceive to be outcomes from integrating AI into your teaching?
Yeah, I also similarly have an assignment where students are tutored on an assignment I've been doing for years. Basically, students have to come up with their own conceptual and operational definitions for an abstract concept. It took me a long time to train that chatbot to act like me. It was hard. It took me months to get it to talk like me and to not give them the answer. But I've been using it now for about 4 quarters now, and it's been really successful. And students love it. And they say, I love that I'm not bugging you, Dr. Pearce, with like these questions because I can ask the chatbot. And so like things like that can be really successful. And I wanted to mention just some examples. And someone actually asked about this in one of the questions about like, what's the evidence for AI in the classroom being beneficial? And if you want, I can paste in. There's a bunch of links to like meta-analyses and things. It's still early days, so who knows? But one example, this is not formally tested, but a few years ago, I introduced an AI interview bot. I'm going to put the link in the chat. It's not an official AI or like a UW IT sanctioned tool, but students are interviewed on things with AI, and it's great. Ever since I've introduced that, I have noticed a big difference in students' understanding of the material. So I looked over years of data on this class, and since I've introduced this tool where they're having to be interviewed by the AI on these topics, the mean grade is higher, but specifically the middle students, the B-, C+ students, made huge leaps. The good students are always doing well. The students that are very challenged are always going to be very challenged, but that middle group made huge leaps. This has made a big difference for me. But I do think, just to add on to what Brock said, is being able to provide students with additional support in these ways, not replacing us, but providing them additional support, especially when students aren't going to be seeking that support out in these traditional ways of coming to us face-to-face, viewing it as sort of adding tools in ways that they can get support in the course is really helpful in terms of providing scaffolding.
I would also like to chime in real quick. So when I think of integrating AI into my teaching, I also consider integrating conversations on AI literacy as sort of a way to integrating AI. So as I said, for my I approach AI differently in different classes, and for my writing classes, by facilitating conversations on AI and information literacy, I feel students were motivated to learn authentically during the writing process. I emphasize the importance of the process over the product of learning a lot in my class, as I believe it's the primary focus of any education. The rumination, the intellectual struggle, the peer support and feedback, and the mistakes needed to be made to learn a skill are things I prioritize in my classes, especially for first-year students. And after explaining to my first-year students that using AI with a product-driven mindset of time saving and efficiency, which contradicts with learning how to think, read, and write critically, because these fundamental skills take time to develop. I noticed that most of them made the choices to go through such a learning process. And even when I had a conversation with them about their non-permitted use of AI, they understood right away why they shouldn't have used it. And the conversation on academic misconduct was much easier to navigate. But for a creative-driven class where the students were asked to conduct genre translation using AI to generate images from course readings on multicultural ethnography, students noticed the stereotypes surfacing from the AI-generated images and critique the unethical products of the AI tools. So I noticed that by incorporating AI tools in specifically my multimodal writing projects, student engagement was increased substantially.
Thank you for sharing about that. I love I love kind of how using AI in the classroom has made students more thoughtful users of AI. I love that. Yeah. Anyway, I think we're gonna move on to our last question, so we can get to questions from the audience. And this is a question that actually Ian came up with, and it's a good question. What do you wish you knew when you started using AI as an instructor? And so we're gonna let Ian take the lead on this one.
Okay, thanks. I guess one thing I wish I knew was how variable the responses can be. So there's a huge number of different sources of variance in the outputs that you get. For one thing, randomness is built into the algorithm. So asking the same prompt to the very same engine can get you different responses. But also, new engines are way better than old engines. So if you played with AI a little while ago and tried to see if it was relevant to your field and then totally wrote it off, the new engines might change your mind. Also, some engines are way better at different types of questions than others. So if you are interested, for the folks out there who are curious to see how these tools work, I would suggest don't just get one. Don't just use Copilot or a single engine. Try to investigate several to see their strengths and weaknesses. And then the last thing I was going to say is prompting makes a huge difference. There's a learning curve on crafting good prompts. So prompt engineering maybe is going to change a year from now. I'm sure it will. But in the space that we're in right now, learning how to craft prompts effectively will hugely impact the quality of the responses that you get.
Okay, let's do a speed round. Brock.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I totally agree. I never use the word prompt engineering because it's not really engineering. It's more like prompt, throw a dart at the dartboard, right? And sometimes it gets there and sometimes it doesn't. One thing I wish I knew is that you can train whatever model or models you're working with to give you better results from the get-go. And many tools now have a way to like remember the kind of responses that it should give to you. And so I always take advantage of that and just provide that context. And also progressively paying out what you expect the model to generate often leads to much better results. So just knowing that you can make better responses is very useful.
May.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of things I wish I knew to address right away to my colleagues and my students when I just began using AI tools, such as the equity issues in students' access and even also faculty's varied access to AI tools, and privacy concerns and what do they entail, and also the environmental impact of the data centers. And now I'm actively bringing them up now as part of the AI literacy conversations.
Katy, do you have any response to this question about what you wish you knew?
If I could go back in time and not had gone through the emotional roller coaster of chasing after misconduct, that would have been nice. And I think that, I mean, even still, I tell myself at the beginning of every quarter, like, do not get emotionally worked up and personally offended. And so I think that for me, the way to counterbalance the anger and emotions about misconduct was really, it's not fighting fire with fire, but like that I'm using these tools to gain back time that I would rather be spending with my family or taking a nice walk outside or working on something more interesting for the class, or just finding little efficiencies in my life has somehow balanced all of the sort of negative energy that I had around it. Ethical considerations are always at the forefront, but somehow in the greater scheme of things, I think that if I had been a little bit more balanced at the beginning, that would have been a good thing.
And I'll just chime on this one. For me, when I first started thinking about it, I felt like AI was in control, like I was being yanked by the neck toward some goal that I didn't set. And over time, I've realized that I am in control of how I use AI in my life. And I can set the goals and determine how to integrate AI into my work. And so I wish I had arrived at that mindset a little bit earlier, but I'm there now. All right, well, thank you. Those are the questions we had kind of talked about beforehand. And now it's time to get to questions from the audience. And remember, you can submit questions by emailing townhall@uw.edu. We had a series of questions about the ethics and the very clear social, ethical, privacy, environmental worries and drawbacks of using AI. I wondered if any of the panelists wanted to talk about how they have addressed the ethical drawbacks of AI.
I could give a sort of a kind of answer to that. Maybe not from the perspective or direction one might have thought at first. But one of my students, and I described this activity earlier where I had students engage with AI, and one of my students was so deeply skeptical that she was just not, she's very curious. She has taken a few courses with me where AI is part of the mix, and she has always addressed this skepticism of AI being trained without people's permission and these legitimate, serious concerns. And so she said, I don't really want to engage even on this activity, right? Using this AI tool to critique my work. And I of course, I gave her a way out for that. But it's an interesting way that ethics, raised its head from a direction I wasn't expecting. And the way out was to give her, feedback and other opportunities for that were not AI mediated on her submission. But it just demonstrated to me and reminded me that the ethical considerations are all over the place, and our students are deeply thinking about this.
I'm like looking at Ian because, come on, Ian, do you want to chime in? You're a philosophy professor.
Yeah, Brooke sort of took the words out of my mouth, though, so now I have to think of a new response. So when I used AI in the classroom, the assignment that I described earlier, I also had a conversation with students in the classroom. So I think having those conversations with students is the very first thing I would suggest. And some of the students, unsurprisingly, didn't want to use AI in the assignment. And so I put them in a group and sat down with them and we talked and we brainstormed ideas and devised a way of doing the assignment. So I think bringing students into the process so that they understand that you care about those concerns, you share the same kinds of concerns and are trying to think about them intelligently. I think that's the atmosphere that I try to bring into the classroom, at least.
Thanks. And I'm sorry, not sorry for putting you on the spot. May or Katy, do you want to talk about how you kind of address ethical problems with AI with students?
I mean, I can just mention, for me, I teach technology and society classes almost exclusively. And so talking about technology and ethics, I also teach tech ethics classes quite often. So it's a part of everything that's going on in my classroom already. So I guess for me, it's a little bit different because it's so integrated into everything that is done that, I'm starting from a different place. But I generally will focus to my research method students, for example, about talking about intellectual property considerations, about the ethical considerations about passing off things that you do not create as your own, about the labor concerns, about the environmental concerns, the equity concerns. And that's one of the reasons why the university providing Copilot is, if I'm asking students to use AI tools in class, at least I know that they all have access to this. It is really unfortunate. I have had some activities where there's other tools they use, and the students who have the paid versions of the tools can get the assignment done faster. That feels terrible to me. So when I do them, I'll say to students, like, if we're going to use this tool, I want to warn you that if you're using the free version, you're going to hit this limit at this point. So yeah, it's baked into everything. And I think it's really important to be thinking about this and as we go forward and to be articulating it to students. It is messy, but we're not starting from zero. For example, now if I talk to students about, well, the training data that these tools use has human biases in it. They're like, yeah, I know. They know because we've been talking to these students for the last number of years about how algorithms replicate and amplify biases. So we got to keep on continuing to have the conversation amongst ourselves and with our students and pay attention to what's going on because it's ever evolving too. And I think that as we look forward, I was just looking the other day at literature review tools with AI, which are terrible, by the way. And I'm seeing now that like different publishers are aligning with different tools. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be terrible. Just another space where not everyone's going to have access to the same things. So keep your eyes on it as you're using these tools yourself and in the classroom.
And I'll add real quick. I believe when I answered the last question, I did talk about it. The concerns I would talk to my students about in terms of AI use, the equity issues, and I think my fellow panelists have already addressed that. We have a different access than these two different sort of assignments that the students can create based on the access they have, and we cannot tell them not to pay this and use that, right? They can use it on only if they want to. And so that's one thing I would tell them outright. This is what's happening right now with the lack of access to AI tools that happen to certain students, and and the other thing will be environmental impact in terms of how we for the data centers we need water to cool the facilities, things like that, and then we share information. I share information I know about that. Is the concerns that we need to have. So that's right now the conversation I have. On a personal side of things, I find myself sort of interrogating myself how I use AI. What's ethical for me as a teacher? What do you see my purpose is as a teacher? So there are things where I said, do I want to use it or don't use it? And so I do have that moments a lot whenever, because I'm someone that enjoys spending time creating prompt. I know they're time consuming and we all know that, but for a lot of assignments, I actually enjoy that process of teaching, the part that students cannot really see. So that's a question I would ask myself. Do I want to, at the moment, use AI to help me do it? Or do I want to go through it? I don't have an answer to that. It's just where I am now.
Yeah, and just to build on that, like there are choices we can make, right? So the Copilot version that UW has, it's not as spiffy as some of the stuff that UW does not yet support. And there's a reason for that, right? There's added protections that UW has negotiated. And so that's a choice we make. Like I choose not to use anything but Copilot at this moment in time because there are added privacy protections there. And I know that my input's not going to be used to train the model, and I wouldn't want students using a tool where their input is used to train the model. I also think it's really important that we need to talk with students about not using generative AI as the internet, not using it just to answer questions, like using it thoughtfully, to your point, May, deciding, okay, maybe I don't have a quota of how often I use it, but I'm going to ask myself the question before I just kind of knee-jerk use it as I might use the internet. So I think there are choices we can make here. Let's get to a question from the email. Is in-person learning even more important in the age of AI in terms of communicating with each other in person in ways that aren't reliant on the use of AI? And related, it's a pretty long question. Do you see a decline in online learning, or what are some key ways online learning must change significantly in the age of AI? So a question about whether or not in-person learning is going to become more important in the age of AI, and what's the future of online learning given AI?
I can take this first. This is my 2 cents. I think since AI happened, it's been more challenging for me to engage students in authentic conversations about AI literacy or AI use policy in my online asynchronous classes, because it's harder to gauge students' buy-in in an online environment where there are no real-time interactions. But for an online synchronous class, I'd say it's more easily doable. One key way that I foresee online learning must change to answer the question will be to have a secure institution-specific AI tool like what Penn mentioned, our Copilot, trained uniquely by the instructor teaching the course to enhance students' learning in an online environment so that students will use AI appropriately and ethically. I recently read about example from UCLA. There's an instructor, they use their institutional secure AI tool called Kudu, and they created a complete course completely using AI so the instructor spent a lot of time training the AI tools with their own instruction materials, their own voices, their own feedback, everything, their own knowledge about that course. And then that was specifically made by AI tools. So we'll see what happens. I think they are piloting this in winter quarter. I'm excited to see what happens there.
Anyone else want to chime in on the importance of in-person learning in the age of AI and or the future of online learning?
I think it does highlight that we really need to look closely at assessments. I mean, everyone is worried, how are my assessments going to work? Particularly online and online asynchronous, your assessment methods are going to have to take into account that things can be generated automatically, and that's going to be a tough area for sure. I don't know the answers yet, but it's certainly an area to focus on for what's challenging ahead.
It is important to remember that the majority of students admit to cheating before AI, right? The numbers were ridiculously high, the percentage of students that admit to cheating. So AI isn't creating a cheating epidemic. I don't think we're already there. Anyone else about the importance of online or in-person learning in the age of AI? I have heard a couple of faculty members talking about how they're just going to go back to 100% in-person activities, and assignments are always going to be done in the classroom. There's not going to be any homework. They're going to do tests only in the classroom. How do folks feel about that? Reactions to that?
The equity issues are so disturbing there, right? You just block so much access for so many eager, enthusiastic, and capable students if that's the only possible solution. That's unfortunate.
No other takers?
It is a hard thing because it is a solution. And I will say I am doing a lot. I had my winter quarter class. If I compare it to the version of it from, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I'm covering a lot less material because instead of students writing outside the classroom, they're writing in the classroom. But my classes were already flipped. So students were engaging with my lecture material generally outside of the classroom anyway. So is it what I would have thought I wanted my ways of assessment to be a number of years ago? It is not. In this moment, is it working for me? I guess it is. I wish that there were ways to reduce the labor that is involved, because especially for those who are teaching very large lectures, in which really only efficient way to evaluate is through particular means. And it's much harder now. So I don't know. I wish I could be more gung-ho about all of this, but we will get to a place where we sort of figure things out. But for now, I understand why some people are just moving towards a lot of in-person assessments.
I was kind of shocked when talking about this, the pushback that I got to the notion of doing everything in real time in the classroom. There were some folks who teach writing, some faculty members who teach writing, that argued vociferously against doing all writing in the classroom because of the iterative nature of writing and the reflection and the amount of time you should spend thinking about writing. And so it was interesting. The pushback came from kind of a sector of the academy that I didn't expect to be pushing back. I don't know. May, I know you teach writing. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this.
Yeah, I think it's from one of the books we read in our evidence-based teaching fellow program. I'm not gonna name the book now, but that book specifically said that what will happen to writing instructors is that we will be sent back to 19th century, and then everyone's gonna go to a classroom just to write an essay. They're sitting there for 2 hours and timed writing, which we've been resisting a lot in our past developed writing pedagogies. I think this is challenging. I wouldn't say this is easy at all, but I do think that what I really would want to work on would be how to think about, again, process-based learning, reflection for my online teaching classes. How do I really engage my students so that they know that I'm not evaluating mostly the products of what they have, submitted. I care about their learning process and then how they can authentically learn the subject. And I know we all do that very differently as writing instructors. And that's how anyone cultivates critical thinking. And that's a process. And I of course, again, it's challenging to engage students asynchronously, as I said, in this particular process, because you're not there and then they don't feel like they're being supported if you're not there. So how do we do that when it's not real time? That's why I feel like some sort of, I think I mentioned in one of the notes I wrote down here. I thought about it. I feel like, what if there's an LLM tool, large language learning model tool, AI tool that could help, that's embedded in Canvas that can help students annotate reading interactively. Like, so when because I think that's the biggest challenge. Why students don't want to, why don't they want to write the papers? Because they have to read through the papers and it's daunting. They don't have that attention span. They're like, oh, this is so many pages, may assign too many readings, right? So they always talk about that. Let me ask AI to read for me real quick, summarize it. But how do I help them not make that choice, right? So I feel like if there's an AI tool that can sort of create interactive reading experiences where when students look at a document and they annotate, what does this mean? Or I think what this means, and AI responds to that annotation right away. So the whole thing more like a sort of conversational, game-based kind of reading experience. I feel like possibly that could engage students in actually going through the reading and learning the materials authentically. And they will be graded, of course, on that process of going through that interactive annotative activities. That's just my dream. I hope that it happens someday. Yeah.
We got another question. How will you ensure that generative AI is providing accurate answers to students?
Yeah, I can take this one. It is a great question, and it's something that we talk about a lot with teaching, and it's one of those sort of almost cliches now about hallucinations, which meaning like when the AI creates information which is not based in reality or fact, that they have these fake citations. You're like, where do these fake citations come from? It's a hallmark of AI and misconduct. So what's interesting about this question, which is a very good one about accurate information, is that if we think about the way that generative AI works, it's drawing from its training data and it's creating output, When there is not information in its training data, it generates novel output. So this is fantastic when we're trying to create a cool new activity for the classroom, or we're trying to come up with the best chocolate chip cookie recipe ever. It's not great when we actually need validated information that is based in fact. Then it's a problem. So I just want to point out that this is both a feature and a bug, that it's the way the system works. And so it's horrible when the system hallucinates. It's like a citation, but it's great when I'm trying to think of cool activities for my kid's birthday party. So it's what's really important is that we as faculty or staff or whoever you are and students as well understand that this is how generative AI works and that the content absolutely has to be verified. If you are trying to make a decision based in fact and truth and reality, you have to verify it over and over and over again. So to me, even though the question about how can the University of Washington as an entity help ensure that students are getting accurate information, it's not so much about the UW or that even being possible, because that's not how these systems work. Instead, emphasizing AI literacy and understanding that this is what it generates because this is how it works, I think it'll be more helpful. But absolutely, it is problematic when it generates untrue information. It is a problem, but hopefully we can understand a bit more about that sort of, it's not doing it because there's something wrong with it.
Brock, you have thoughts.
Well, I had a thought. A lot of my colleagues in the College of Engineering are involved in teaching and learning in subjects that require a lot of mathematics or have some, there's a something concrete from the natural world that can be demonstrated, and math is kind of an obvious one. And this can also be a sort of a learning opportunity for students to kind of reveal, the wizard behind the curtain and how broken the wizard often is. If you try to have the tool solve a particular equation that you're going through with students and you see obviously that it can't do it, then you can interrogate, well, why is that happening? What would be the correct answer here? And just give an example of how this isn't going to be the solution for every kind of a need, as Katy was pointing out. So in those instances where an obvious answer can be arrived at, it kind of puts into relief what the challenges are for the tools. So that's an opportunity, perhaps.
Here's a couple more reflections. So the short answer, which my colleagues are giving, is how do we ensure that the answers are accurate? We can't, and so we don't. But I want to compare that to an analogous question, which is really important in pedagogy. A lot of us rely on peer learning, and we know that learning from peers is a really important tool. How do we guarantee that peer feedback or just peers discussing with each other is going to converge on the truth? Well, we can't ensure that the peers are giving accurate answers to each other or accurate feedback. But the mere requirement that students engage in higher order thinking, they don't just take the feedback and run with it. They have to themselves reflect on it and digest it. That is an incredibly beneficial learning experience in addition. So that's even better than just having straightforward factual answers given to you. That's why peer feedback is so effective in peer learning. And there's been great studies showing that when peers engage in think, pair, shares, and then they're retested later on, they tend to converge on the truth. So actually students learning from other students in similar positions over the long run helps all of them, so the misinformation doesn't spread. Actually, accurate information conglomerates. So what I would love to see, here's some pedagogy research we can do. Let's see if we can replicate those studies with students using AI or do something similar.
I agree. I think one of the single most valuable things we can help students understand is that AI, you cannot guarantee its accuracy. And that's good for students, right? Because humans are valuable if AI is fallible, right? But it's also a wonderful teaching tool, as we've talked about. Having to ask, is AI really, is this answer right? Already they're engaging in higher order thinking. So I think it's a wonderful bug and makes AI a terrific teaching tool. I think we have time for maybe one more question, And this is kind of a niche question, but I think we can make it relevant to a broader audience. The questioner says, looking ahead, when ChatGPT or similar tools can handle the majority of coding tasks, do you think it's still worthwhile for people to learn coding? I spent 4 years studying computer science, yet now even a freshman with ChatGPT can write very good code. What say you?
Okay, I have a bunch of thoughts on this, so I'll try to be quick. My way of thinking about this is to generalize it because I think something similar could be said in all humanistic fields too. AI can write passable or some mediocre essays in a philosophy class. So how do we think about it? And my view is it requires us to step back and think about from the instructor point of view, what are we accomplishing in our classes? What are the learning goals that we really want students to take out of here? Because if the only thing, if they're not getting something differentially beneficial, if they're not getting new learning goals or outcomes that they didn't have when they could have just thrown the prompt into the AI at the beginning of the quarter, then what are we doing? What have we accomplished? And I would just say to this student thinking about their 4-year degree, I am guessing that in your classes, you have learned much more than just what an AI can generate with code. So you are learning critical thinking skills. You are learning teamwork and how to work with your peers to accomplish an objective. Those are super important skills for any profession. You are learning how to ask the right questions. So how to take a problem and how to analyze it so you know even what to put into the AI once you get to a job that maybe allows you to use it because it makes you more efficient. So I don't teach coding classes, so I can't say exactly what those skills are, but I am guessing you have effective instructors you've encountered over these 4 years that have ambitious learning goals of those sorts and that you're getting a lot out of those classes.
Can I just piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah.
I do teach some coding classes, and what I've done is it's actually helped students to get further than I could take them before. Just in short, since we're short on time, there are ways that you can use such tools to help them, like not spend 2 hours looking for a missing semicolon or something like that, and like actually build their skills and help them go further. But it's not, you have to think it through and think how to do it. Many of my colleagues in computer science and engineering have embraced this and recognized these challenges.
And I'll just tack on, echoing everything that Ian and Brock said. But one thing that I have been doing in my classes for, I don't know, about a year now, is being really explicit with students every single week about what we are covering in the class that are things that humans can do that AI is not good at doing. Because, you know, our undergraduates in particular, they're really scared. They don't know what kind of workforce they're going to be entering. And I tell them very clearly, the jobs my friends and I took right out of undergrad, those jobs now don't really exist anymore because a lot of those entry-level skills can be done by AI. And so I every week go through what are we doing in the class this week that is explicitly to help you be better than AI. We're going to work on ethical decision making, collaboration, being aware of other cultural norms, being creative in the ways that we are dealing with real world problems. And so I don't know if the students are fully buying it. I don't know if they're like, oh, this is changing everything for me. But I'm saying it every week. I put it in my learning modules as like kind of a secondary set of learning modules for or learning objectives for every module. And it's also AI is good at generating these too, by the way. And so I'm trying to meet them where they're at in this, while also knowing we don't really know. But I think that everything that Ian said and Brock was supporting about that a lot of these skills are not going to go away and that we're helping them develop things that it doesn't really matter if technology changes.
Well, thank you. Oh, May, do you have something? Go ahead, chime in.
Oh, so just real quick, because I fully agree with what Brock, Ian, and Katy said, and teaching, first year students writing classes that's impacts. I don't know, maybe it's comparable to learning coding for, the freshmen with ChatGPT, that how ChatGPT can accomplish coding class. But I saw a note in the chat that I feel like that kind of help us answer this question pretty well. The chat says that the invention of calculators didn't destroy mathematicians. It advanced the field massively, and chatbots writing code will not destroy the need for software engineers. And I do think that, writing is still necessary. I will say students have to learn how to write, how to think, and then think critically. And perhaps practically talking about this, perhaps learning outcomes will need to be revised, well, in the age of AI. But we revise our learning outcomes, every once in a while anyway. We do it regularly, right? Just to improve teaching and learning. So my 2 cents also echoing all of you, just how we kind of like facilitate AI literacy. What's the point of learning in college? Process is what matters most, and that's what I want to always emphasize to my students.
Love it. Thank you, May. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to our panelists for sharing their wisdom and experience. I'm going to put a link in chat. I promised this at the beginning. This is a good place to start for thinking about how to integrate AI into your teaching. This page is constantly under revision. So if you have ideas, feel free to reach out to me about things that we should add to this page. I also want to note that there's a final AI town hall on AI and institutional infrastructure on December 18th. So look for information about that. And thank you all. And I wish you a smooth end to your quarter. Take care.